Chapter 22. Adam takes charge. Exhausted, Lake fell asleep as soon as she closed her eyes. Suddenly, she found herself floating in an ocean of water. The large full moon, shining in the night sky, lit the darkness. Waves were rising and falling all around her. She thrashed desperately, looking in all directions, searching for Adam and her new friends. She didn't see anyone, nor did she see land, boats, or anything she could swim to. Breathing heavily, she gasped out, "Help!" Thinking she saw something white about 50 feet ahead of her bobbing in the water, Lake swam towards the mysterious object. The undulating rise and fall of the rough seas made it impossible for her to keep the shape in her sight. After a couple of minutes, she realized that she had lost it. Lake didn't know if it sank, drifted off, or maybe she got turned around and went searching in the wrong direction. Lake kept looking with an impending sense of doom. Her arms and legs were tiring, and her chest was burning. She swallowed some water and started to cough and began to lose hope of rescue. The scene darkened as the rain began to pour down, blocking out the moonlight. It was now pitch black, and Lake was lost. As lightning lit up the heavens, Lake felt the tap on her shoulder. Still barely managing to tread water, she spun around to see a teenage girl dressed in a white hospital gown. It was the same girl from her parents' hospital, but she was no longer covered in bandages. Even though it was dark, Lake could tell the girl was very pretty. The girl smiled and motioned Lake to follow her. Then she dived down, disappearing beneath the surface. Lake stared at the water, not knowing what to do, and called out, "Wait!" A few moments later, the girl returned, saying, "Why didn't you follow me?" She took Lake's hand and said, "It's called trust. You need to learn how to trust. Come on." Lake was scared, but nodded in agreement anyway. She took a deep breath and dove. Then she heard a deafening crack of thunder and jerked upright. Even though Lake thought she tasted salt, she realized that it had just been another dream. She wasn't really with the girl from the hospital. She was in the small cabin with Adam and Jack. The wind was howling, and the trees were cracking all around the train. The rain was coming down in buckets. It was now sometime in the middle of the night, and the thunder most likely shook the occupants of the entire train awake. Both Jack and Adam were now looking out of the window into the blackness, doing their best to assess the situation. The storm was so intense that there was no real hope of any of them going back to sleep. Down the hall, Verona also awoke, and as soon as she did, she got a terrible feeling, which scared her. She instructed Lincoln to get up and put on his coat. Adam, Jack, and Lake all jumped when they heard a loud knock on the door. Adam looked at Jack and asked, "Who can that be? What should we do?" Before Jack could respond, they heard a girl's voice. "It's Verona. Let us in." Adam quickly unlocked the door, and Lincoln and Verona ran inside, looking terrified. Even though they were all frightened, Adam and Jack tried not to let it show too much. Soon, Verona also calmed herself, and the three of them attempted to comfort Lake and Lincoln. The lightning continued to flash every couple of seconds. The wind sounded like a jet engine. The train seemed as if it was going to be blown off the tracks with every crack of thunder until finally it did. A tall, massive tree came crashing down onto the train, and the three cars, positioned just behind the kids' car, were hit so violently that they were knocked from the tracks. It sounded like an explosion, and their cabin was rocked. After what seemed like an eternity for the group's car to finally stop shaking and the kids to stop screaming. They all looked around, assessing the damage. There was a large crack in the cabin wall, and the window had shattered. The rain came pouring into the room. Adam was the first to start moving. He managed to pry open the door of the cabin into another chaotic scene. He saw people running down the corridor and jumping off the train where Verona's cabin used to be. Adam turned around and saw Lake looking around with even bigger eyes than she already naturally had. Jack was unsuccessfully trying to cover up the broken window with a blanket, and Verona was hugging Lincoln and covering his head. Adam wanted to curl up in a ball and hide. Usually, the thought of action paralyzed him, but over the course of the last few days, he had been doing things out of his comfort zone. He had grabbed Lake and escaped from the hospital. He had stood up to 4 grown men. Somehow, the trip seemed to be training the young man for action. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and calmed his nerves, at least as much as possible, given the extreme chaos surrounding him. When he opened his eyes, Adam looked around at the group. He thought, I only just met these people, but he knew he had to keep them all safe. There's no more time for worrying about the things that usually prevent me from acting. They need action. They need me. At the top of his lungs, Adam shouted over the storm and screaming passengers, I promise you that I am not going to leave any of you behind. We are all in this together. We are going to be fine. Right now, we're getting off this train. We can't stay. It's not safe here. Get your stuff. He was pointing as he yelled out orders. Verona, you have Lincoln, Jack. You hold Lake's hand, and all you follow me. This was a new and improved Adam. He was in control, decisive and brave. Adam was taking charge. Jack didn't move. Instead, he yelled back, We should stay on the train. It's safer here than it is in the woods. He paused, then added, In a storm in the middle of the night? Verona silently thought Jack might be correct, but then thought that this was potentially another sign leading her to the Moon Woman. So she remained silent on the subject and instead stood up, holding Lincoln's hand. Both Adam and Jack saw Verona stand in what appeared to be a show of support for Adam's plan. Adam appreciated the sign of support, even though he silently thought he didn't know what he was doing and questioned whether Jack was right. Nevertheless, her support, or at least what Adam perceived as support, encouraged him to stand firm, and again he demanded, We're leaving. Grab my little sister's hand and follow me. Relenting, Jack nodded and grabbed Lake's hand. He bent down close to her ear, saying, I've got you. You can trust me. Suddenly, Lake remembered her dream. It's called trust. Lake gave Jack a nod and squeezed his hand tight. They all managed to get into the corridor. Adam saw that the giant fallen tree was now lying exactly where Verona's cabin once was. The room was now completely smashed. Adam turned to look at Verona. She stopped moving and stared at the tree. Adam gently grabbed her upper arm and whispered, We need to keep moving. Then they jumped off the train, where the other 3 cars had been knocked over and were lying on their sides. Once outside, they gathered for a moment. Adam assumed the train was heading north, and the man on the intercom said the town was to the west. So Adam threaded the group through the wreckage to the left side of the train and ran away from it into the forest. The group followed Adam into the woods, seeking shelter and looking for any signs of civilization. At first, there were hundreds of people running in different directions, But after about 15 minutes, they were all alone. It was dark, and there were trees everywhere. Adam thought he may have gotten turned around and lost, because, after what seemed like a long while, dodging lightning bolts and getting pounded by rain, Adam hadn't seen anyone or anything. Thinking he had made a terrible mistake, potentially leading the kids into more danger, he began to lose hope that they were ever going to find shelter. Not seeing any alternative, Adam desperately continued to lead the group deeper and deeper into the forest. Well over an hour after jumping off the train, the group was now moving at a slow walk's pace. They were tired, soaking wet, and weather-beaten. Adam stopped and looked around. Feeling defeated, he finally sat down on the trunk of a fallen tree. Adam thought he had failed the others. The rest of the group also took the opportunity to rest. Verona handed Lincoln off to Jack and came to sit next to Adam. She didn't say a word for several minutes. Adam's head was down when Verona asked him in a voice just loud enough to be heard over the wind and rain, "Adam, do you see that?" Adam looked up but couldn't see anything. He unsuccessfully tried to clear the rain from his glasses and looked again. This time, he could just make out what looked like a small figure slowly moving towards them about 20 yards away. At first, Adam was alarmed, thinking it may be a wild animal or worse. Was this something they would need to potentially fight off? But as the figure grew closer and closer, Adam's vision focused, and he realized it was a small child. Adam and Verona yelled to the others to wait there as they ran to the lost child. It was a young boy, maybe 5 or 6 years old. He never looked up or even acknowledged the fact that Verona and Adam were now standing right in front of him. He appeared to be mumbling. They both leaned in closer until they could hear what he was saying. "Stick together, stick together." The boy just kept saying, "Stick together," over and over again. Adam looked around, but he didn't see anyone else. The boy was all alone. Verona reached out and touched his shoulders. Then she shouted over the rain, "Are you okay?" The boy finally looked up out of his trance, staring at Verona, and yelled, "Sabotage!" Next, he turned towards Adam, grabbed him by the arm, and screamed, "Hold him!" Then, the young boy collapsed into Adam's arms, passing out and losing consciousness. Catching him, Adam looked towards Verona. They were confused and terrified. They turned back towards the others. But just then, a flash of lightning stretched for miles across the dark sky as it lit the forest enough for Verona to spot what looked like a large, hollowed-out fallen tree just up ahead. Verona tapped Adam's shoulder and pointed, yelling, "Over there!" Adam saw what Verona was pointing out, and he carried the boy to the tree while Verona ran back to get the others. They all made their way to the hollowed-out tree. Everyone piled inside the tree and out of the rain. Verona turned on a flashlight she had packed before she left her house in Belvedere. It was waterlogged and didn't turn on right away. She hit the end of it a couple of times with the palm of her hand, and it finally came to life. She pointed the beam upwards, and the light bounced around the inside of the tree, creating a slight glow. All the children were staring at the boy. Verona was concerned for the stranger because he was unconscious, but also because he was burning up with a fever. Lincoln took off his torn jacket and tried wrapping it around the water-soaked and visibly shaking boy. Soon, they all put down some coats and laid down to wait out the night and the storm. Lake sat next to the boy and, due to the cramped space, had to put her arm around him. This made Adam uncomfortable, but he allowed it to happen. After a short time, the younger kids had fallen asleep. Then Adam told Jack and Verona to get some sleep. Jack mustered up a minor objection, volunteering to keep watch. But once again, Adam insisted. Jack and Verona each nodded and got as comfortable as they could, given the circumstances of being inside an old tree. But they were exhausted, and soon Jack and Verona had also drifted off. Adam stayed awake. He felt responsible for their situation, so he just watched over them while they all slept to make sure that nothing else happened to them during the night.